It's been said that every person is in certain respects like all other people, like some other people, and like no other person. Another way of putting it is, each of us is unlike anybody else, but none of us is completely unique. To help us understand in what way we end up being one kind of personality or another, we welcome Brian R. Little, author of Me, Myself, and Us, The Science of Personality and the Art of Well-Being. He's also a fellow at Cambridge University's Well-Being Institute and a distinguished research professor emeritus at Carleton University. And it's good to welcome you back. How many years later?
Thank you.
To TVO?
10 years.
10 years
yes.
ago. Well, speaking of 10 years ago, those with incredibly good memories may recall that you were one of the finalists for TVO's Best Lecturer competition back in the day. So before we talk about all personalities, let's talk about your personality as you saw it. You ready to see yourself from 10 years ago?
I guess.
Let's roll the clip, please, Sheldon.
Somebody who is really introverted may, in order to advance a core project that really matters, may act as an extrovert. I'll give you an example. It's the person who, true to his real nature right now, is disappearing. But arising, we rise again. Why? Because we're in the middle of a lecture, and the lecture enjoins us to act out of character. As an introvert, my preferred place right now would be about 800 feet from here, underground. I spent the hour and a half before my lecture in Lise Paquette's office down there, hiding under the desk. Why? Because I'm biologically introverted. Am I rare? Not at all. Many of you are, as I, a pseudo-extrovert.
That's good stuff. Okay, well, to the untrained eye, such as my own, I would have, I'd have sworn that you're an extrovert given that performance. When did you know you were actually an introvert?
That gradually emerged, I guess, during my adolescence, when I found that it didn't take much to overstimulate me. Now, I didn't have the language to describe it until I became a professor, but there was a sense that while I loved people and enjoyed being with them, I could overload to the extent that I couldn't carry out the tasks I was supposed to be carrying out, or the projects that I was pursuing, unless I had some kind of restorative niche to which I could repair.
So you are truly happiest when you are 800 feet underground, as you described it.
That's a great question. I think I'm truly happy when I'm pursuing a project that means the world to me. And so I'm happy when I'm professing, because professing is a core project in my life. But whether my arousal level may be up and it may be a bit uncomfortable for me, that's another question. So there are different types of happiness.
What are, in which case, I'm trying to get a better understanding of what the characteristics are of a truly introverted person, which again, I didn't think that you were based on that performance. So help us understand that. If wanting to be 800 miles underground, or feet, or whatever it was, is part of what makes you an introvert, what are the other characteristics that make you so?
I think one of the main characteristics of introverts is that they adopt a style that is rather more subtle than their extroverted colleagues. You can discern it in the speech styles, so that I, like many introverts, adopt a highly contingent style. So I like to put parenthetical clauses around things. I want to qualify them in ways that would drive many extroverts crazy, because they just want to say, what are you trying to say? And I will say, well, I think it was the case that I was, in a sense, trying to say what I said, and then I would go on for another 18 clauses, and the extrovert gets impatient. And I think we also have different styles of interacting. For example, the extrovert likes to stand close for comfortable communication. They like to have a lot of mutual gaze, or a lot of body contact, usually unsolicited. And introverts tend not to do that. It's not necessarily that they don't like people. It's just that it arouses them too much in the neocortex, the part of the brain that we're talking about when we talk about individual differences in extroversion.
And yet, look at you. You are leaning into the table. Your hands are open from time to time, suggesting that you're an extrovert, not an introvert. So
I call myself a pseudo-extrovert.
Pseudo.
I like many profs and TV hosts, have to engage in projects like an interview in which you rise to the occasion.
So you're faking it right now, Brian.
That's a good, that's an interesting way of putting it. Am I faking it, or am I acting out of character to rise to the occasion, to put on a performance of integrity?
Oh, nice, okay.
Right.
Nice way to put it. Are men more prone to introversion in your research as opposed to women?
No, there's no difference, but there's a subtlety there. See, this is good introvert talk coming. The subtlety is that there are two aspects of extroversion or introversion that we can differentiate. One is a need for stimulation, and the other is being sociable and enjoying social exchanges. If you break the scores down into those two components, what you find is that men are higher on the exploratory, engaged with stimulation activities, and women tend to be more socially involved. And so if you add the two together, there are no gender differences. But if you split them apart, you start to see a trend.
Let me ask you about politics, because I followed politics for about 30 years in this country, and it sure seems like extroversion and politics go hand in hand. Is it the case?
I think an extroverted style and politics go hand in hand, and that there's a tendency for extroverts to be attracted to politics. But I think some individuals who are introverted by nature, who get into politics because they have a passionate concern with social justice, let's say, can pass as extroverted, but in fact pay a price for acting that way. Burnout. After a period of time, if you're protractedly acting out of character.
I think I finally get Barack Obama and Stephen Harper, because these are two, obviously, male politicians at the height of their games right now, who are, I think, introverted guys who are, as you are right now, playing extroverts during the course of their presidency and prime ministership. But for Obama, he needs to get on that golf course in a solitary place to recharge, as you said. And for the PM, I think it's probably his music, you know? He plays music at 24 Sussex.
I thought you were going to say hockey, but
he doesn't play hockey. He wrote a book about hockey.
Right, but I thought that he may throw himself into the spectator role of hockey, but I think you've hit it right on the head. Music, and that's something that I'm passionate about as well, and it's extraordinarily restorative for me. And I think that one of the clues, although I'm hesitant to psychodiagnose presidents and prime ministers, but I think one thing that's pretty obvious about Obama is his introverted speech styles, his tendency to weigh things, to slow down the speech, to do all the qualifications that would satisfy a law lecturer at the University of Chicago.
Well, which is what he was.
Yeah. Right, of course. But may not actually engage with that guy in Peoria who says, what are you trying to say?
Come on, let's get to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Christina Aguilera apparently is an introverted person, and I don't know, the conventional wisdom might be that artists who have to play in front of 18,000 people in a sold-out hockey arena would be extroverts. Are artistic people more often than not introverted than extroverted?
Yes, they are. They are. And there's something about group size that is really intriguing, and that is that extroverts, if you look at how comfortable you feel interacting with different group sizes, extroverts are least comfortable interacting one-on-one. And then as more people come in, if Wodet were to come in now and somebody else from makeup were to come in, then the extrovert feels happier because now we can all get interrelated and engaging in the cut and thrust of exciting discussion.
You dropped the name of the producer of this segment, Wodet,
Indeed,
just so people know.
Absolutely, yes. And what we found is that as more people come up, for extroverts, I have to do this. I'm a professor. I can't help but do the graph. Here is comfort level, and here are the number of people. So if you have one person, extroverts aren't that comfortable. But as more people come into it, up to size 10 is all we've studied, then they become increasingly comfortable. For introverts, it starts off, they're most comfortable one-on-one.
Sure.
So I'm really comfortable with this. But if you had Jordan Peterson here, or Bob Ray, or somebody like that, and we're all having a group discussion, that would start to become increasingly uncomfortable.
For you, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Until a group size of about 5 or 6, and then it goes up again. So that when you have 10 people, here's a good hint for having a house party or dinner, invite 10 people, not 5. Because once you get beyond 5 or 6 people, for introverts, you can pair off with impunity.
Can I talk to you about the ocean of personalities that are inside all of us? And by ocean, we're talking about, well, let me list them and then we'll go through them, okay?
Yes.
Ocean is an acronym
Yep.
for open to new experiences, conscientious, extroverted, agreeable, nervous, and or high-strung.
Right.
So let's go through these one by one. Openness suggests what in terms of trying to determine personality?
The open personality is someone who has a very low threshold for getting engaged, whether it be internal ideas or external possibilities. They throw themselves into it. A term I use a lot and that I value a lot is alacrity. They say, yes, sure, let's do that. Let's go ahead. Or yeah, let me think about that a bit. And so this can cut across extroversion, introversion, because it simply means a readiness to get engaged.
Fair to say that the extrovert is immediately more open to new experiences where the introvert is not?
I don't think it is.
No? Okay.
I think that it's fair to say that the extrovert is more open to experiences that involve the outside, the external world. Let's go skydiving. The introvert, I think, shows even more alacrity to exploring internal ideas. Let's explore our relationship. I think introverts are more likely to say, oh, okay, yeah, let me look at it.
Whereas the extrovert says, let's just go to the baseball game.
Right, yeah, let's get out of here.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the O. C, conscientiousness. What are the qualities that come with that?
Conscientiousness is the ability to get, and the disposition to get tasks done on time, to have a well-structured life. And it's a very good predictor of success in different fields. In fact, it's probably the best personality predictor of success. Interestingly, with one exception, and that is there's one group for whom being highly conscientious is negatively associated with success.
Which group?
Jazz musicians.
Of course, that makes sense.
So if you have jazz musicians who are highly conscientious, they're likely to glom on to the project at hand, to the particular rhythms that are being played. They are lacking peripheral vision, or peripheral audition, I guess, in this case. Whereas those who are less conscientious are, I think, more able to get the sense of a change of rhythm or the introduction of something that had been missing in the overall frame of the jazz piece.
Gotcha. All right, let's keep going through our ocean here.
Yes.
O, ocean, open to new experiences. C,
Right.
conscientious. E, extroverted. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Agreeableness. Now that seems kind of self-explanatory, but is there anything else we need to know about that?
Yes. Well, it's difficult to disagree that agreeable people are agreeable and pleasant and great in groups. What is, I think, intriguing is the potential health problems associated with disagreeableness. And so cardiac risk and various cardiovascular problems seem to be associated with high disagreeableness in individuals. Agreeable individuals run some risk in that they may, their agreeableness may lead them to become overloaded with students, let's say, social requests, because they're so nice and they're so...
Can't say no.
They can't say no, and I think that can be a problem for them.
No is a powerful word if you learn how to use it in the right circumstances, right?
No.
You're good, Brian, you're good. I totally walked into that.
I told you not to make me laugh because I hurt my ribs.
I know, I'm
that
sorry.
Was great.
I didn't mean to. Okay, neuroticism.
Yeah.
What makes one score high on that scale?
The main characteristic is the tendency to focus upon punishment cues. So when, let's contrast how an extrovert would look out at the environment and a highly neurotic person would. Extroverts would look out and see rewards. They would, in a sense, they look out and they see prey from an evolutionary perspective. Neurotic individuals look out and they see potential punishments. They see predators. And they're...
Rationally or irrationally so?
It's an interesting question. It depends, of course, on the reality of their environment. I think from an evolutionary point of view, it really helped to have a few neurotic individuals around, or else we probably would not be here. I think in personal lives, the shape of a life can be made sadly shortchanged by individuals who only see punishment cues out there and who live their life trying to avoid those cues.
So if you score high on the neurotic scale,
Right.
does it follow that you will probably be an unhappy person?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The subtle follow-on question that only an intellectual introvert would raise is happiness all there is? Or is there a sense of meaning in our lives that trumps happiness? And I would argue that there is. So you notice a drop in happiness when people have children in their life.
You notice a drop in happiness when they have kids?
Yes, in terms of subjective well-being, there's a dip, but it's the most meaningful time of their life. It's not cheerful joy all the time, but it's deeply meaningful, perhaps more meaningful than any other stage of their life.
You want to see some more of you? I do. Let's see some more of you. You don't just lecture. Speaking of music, as we were a moment ago, you do some of that too.
Oh, no.
Shall we show a clip of that?
Oh, no.
Shelton, if you would. Let's roll it.
My earliest memories largely revolve around music and being enjoined by my father to sing. And in fact, the very earliest song that I recall, and I haven't thought of it for many, many, many years, was a song. I'm H-A-P-P-Y, I'm H-A-P-P-Y, I know I am, I'm sure I am, I'm H-A-P-P-Y. Now, talk about enjoining a kid to act disingenuously if in fact I was unhappy at the time.
Okay, are you high on the neurotic scale?
No.
You're not, which is why you can be H-A-P-P-Y.
Yes. That's a very good point. I probably am getting a little more neurotic as I get old. But generally, I've never scored high on neuroticism. One thing that I have scored high on is one of the subscales of neuroticism, which is a kind of self-complexity, or a tendency to wonder how one is doing. It's not vulnerability, but it's a kind of self-consciousness. And I think that has to do with being what in the book I call a very high self-monitor. Somebody who looks to the kind of situation you're in to get guidelines on how to act. And so sometimes that can take a real toll on you.
So it takes a mix of traits to equal a happy person. Fair to say?
If you want a simple recipe for happiness from a trait perspective, it would be high extroversion and low neuroticism. But if you want a broader conception of well-being, then you would want to have the others in as well.
Interesting. My sense is that you are enjoying yourself as we talk here.
Oh, yes.
But
one-on-one.
To see it one-on-one, I get you. But behind that piano, with the music, you seem overjoyed.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm trying not to be offended.
I'd love to play piano with you.
Next time. Next time we bring the piano in here as well. Let's
play?
Not like you. You're better than me. Let's finish up. We got a few minutes left here. By the age of 30, the character has set like plaster and will never soften again. So says the American psychologist William James. You buy into that?
No. I think James got it 50% right. I think that we are essentially, as human beings, half plastered. And
half plastered.
And I think the half that isn't plastered is the half that I call free traits. And so a free trait for me is where you act out of character, as we've already discussed, by acting extrovertedly and gregariously, even though your natural disposition may not be along those lines. Or in the case of agreeableness, you can be a highly agreeable person, but for the whole month of March, you've been miserable, you have been nasty, you have been pushy. And the reason is that you're trying to get some sense of justice for your mom, who's being shunted around different homes, care homes. And you need to stand up to the authorities that are thwarting her quality of life. And so you are being, in that case, somebody is being pseudo-disagreeable.
But
So-
to pick up on your metaphor of we're only half plastered, nothing to do with alcohol, but just what's ingrained in us.
Right.
What parts of our personality then can we work on?
I think we can work on basically all of the big five. And so...
The ocean you talked
about
before.
The ocean, that's right. And most researchers in the field call it the big five. There's a sixth dimension that some people are postulating. But there's some recent evidence that you can change on those dimensions. Whether that change is true change or whether it's just superficial change is still under a lot of examination. And right now I would be hesitant to conclude one way or the other. But there is a capacity for us to change the shape of our lives by the adoption of projects that matter to us.
So if we're 50% plastered and 50% not plastered, is that to say we're sort of half melody and half improv?
Oh, what a nice way of putting that. I love that, yes. I would think we have to have a core structure. You need to know what it is you're improvising from. And so there is a kind, I love that metaphor. So I think that...
I can't take credit for it.
Oh.
Our brilliant producer, Wojtek Szemerd.
No, Wojtek didn't.
It's his, it's all his. I give credit where it's due, it's his.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. He's known for that.
He's a bright guy.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder where he is on this guy. I want to talk to him afterwards, because I did your quiz here, you know.
Yeah.
I did your
Did
Big
Wojtek
Five
do it?
personality test. He did do it.
Yeah, he wouldn't tell me.
He wouldn't tell you how he did?
I don't think so. Oh, no.
You want to see how I did?
I think I could guess.
Okay, let's see.
I think you really are an extrovert.
On ocean,
Yeah.
am I open to new experiences?
Oh, yes.
I scored very high there.
Very
how about
high.
conscientiousness?
I think you would have to be.
I did score high on that.
Okay.
Extroverted?
Yes.
Off the charts.
Really?
Agreeable?
68th centile.
Higher, according to this.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about
I think-
neurotic?
Low. Very low. Yeah.
You nailed me.
But the reason I hesitated on agreeableness is that sometimes in your interviews you'll say, why? Or explain. And in a kind of direct way that you haven't done it with me, for which I'm grateful, but you have the capacity to be very direct and put people on the hot seat.
That's not disagreeable, is it?
To a sentimental introvert, I guess it is.
Good stuff. Okay. Let's, how am I doing on time? I got 5 minutes here? Okay. Let's pick up on this survey here. Forbes survey from last year found that what makes people happiest at work is that they are interested in what they are doing. And the survey found 59% of people feel that way about their jobs. 59%. Not that high.
No.
On the other hand, go back a couple of years, Gallup says in North America, 54% of employees are disengaged, and on top of that, there's another 18% of employees who are actively disengaged. They are both unproductive and spreading the poison wherever they go.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Does that situation that those numbers suggest persist because you have a mismatch between personality and job?
I think in large part that's true. And I think what we need to do is to find ways of getting better matches. And yet, once again, subtleties emerge. So let's give one example. You would think that the best salespeople would be extroverted. That makes a lot of intuitive sense. And the research for many years supported that. But if you break it down into more details, what you find is that there's a group called ambiverts that are somewhere between introversion and extroversion, and which actually define the largest number of people in society. They actually have an advantage in selling. as do some introverts. And the reason is that while there is a match on social engagement and enthusiasm for the extroverts, the introverts listen more. And so they can do better in selling because they don't just come in with their pitch. They say, how about you? What are your thoughts?
What do you need, eh?
Yeah, what do you need?
Interesting. In which case, this sounds like a big problem to me. So many people going to work, hating their jobs, actively unhappy. That mismatch. Should we be teaching in high schools, for example, more about the nature of our psychological profiles to make sure that we sort of get to where we can make a mark?
I think that it's incredibly helpful to get feedback on the pattern of your interests and how it matches the interests of people who are successful in different fields. Personality, I think it would be helpful. My only caveat is that I worry that kids will put themselves into those pigeonholes again. They will say, well, I'm an introvert, and largely as a result of Susan Cain's book, introversion is the new cool. But I think that putting yourself in any slot, being extrovert or neurotic, is dangerous, which is why in the book I emphasize that transition from looking at us merely as a bundle of traits to people pursuing projects that matter to them that often involves acting out of character. So that's the mantra I keep coming back to.
It's so fascinating, and we're really glad you could spare some time for us at TVO today. Brian R. Little, Me, Myself, and Us, The Science of Personality and the Art of Well-Being. Great to see you again here at TVO.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.